Sometimes you gotta know when it's over. You know? They say nothing lasts forever, though. Yo, it seems lately that we don't speak at all. As I see us decrease and fall, I think about the times we were better. We used to be involved. I know we grown apart within the last couple months, but we were young when we hooked up, not knowing needs for my wants. And I won't even front, cause I don't really want you to leave. But I'm not happy here, and I'm not sure you're happy with me. Plus, there's these times when we talk on the phone. There's this uncomfortable silence that makes me wonder if we're better alone. I mean, is it me or are we going at war? Being with you is my vacation, now it's more like a chore. Maybe if you quit the bickering, bitching, and take a listen, we can find ourselves in better positions. I keep wishing for the best, but these thoughts lie in the back of my mind, telling me it's over, we just wasted most of our time. We need to just quit the confusion and come to the sad conclusion that whatever we had in the past was an illusion. Let's go.
Things come and go, they say.
Yeah, it keeps playing in the back.
Hello and welcome to the Intentional Clinician Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Krauss, licensed professional counselor. In today's episode, I'm going to be interviewing Chris Blount. He is a close friend of mine for many years, not sure how many, but a lot. Musician, he's a father, and basically a jack of all trades, currently running a studio in Tacoma, Washington, a music studio. So, Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. It's great to be here, Paul. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
Good. This is, man, it's been a while since we hung out.
It's true.
Yeah, so I thank you for having me on your show. This is great. It's good to see and talk to you.
In person.
Yeah, in person for once. So this is great, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Thank you very much for coming out.
Well, thanks for hosting me here in the Tacoma, Seattle area.
That's right. On Purpose Recordings in Tacoma, Washington.
We are in your studio.
Yes.
Using your equipment, which I am very happy with.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is weird because this is the first time I'm being interviewed in my own space. Normally, I'm doing the interviews.
I've taken over.
Yes, you're taking over. Colonize my damn studio. Thank you.
He went there. Okay, so basically, now I want to talk about a little bit of background, but basically for the listeners, this is going to be an interesting interview. Chris, I'm going to be interviewing you about your personal experience of being an African-American male in the United States and growing up in New Orleans and a lot of life experiences. So I appreciate you being open to this interview.
Absolutely, man. I am all about it. I'm an open book. Let's get into it.
Yeah, so,
Definitely.
Okay, let's get into it. Well, before we get into it, let's give the listeners a little background. How in the heck do we know each other?
Oh, man.
The short version.
Short version. The short G-rated version.
I got a reputation to maintain, Chris. Okay.
There's a reputation. So he's an upstanding gentleman, everybody. And I met him. He's way more clean cut than me, but that doesn't mean he's clean. So like, I think that we actually met. We met through a mutual friend. I think it was a roommate of your friend.
A roommate of a friend I was in a band with in Chicago.
And we met. I want to say going into 2006. We went going into 2006. We met at a New Year's Eve party, and our common bond was Wu-Tang.
That's correct.
Yeah, because everybody who knows him, to all the people listening, he's just a skinny white guy, and I'm hanging out with my friends, and I overheard him talking about Cream, and I am a hip hop enthusiast, and also kind of hood guy, so I was like, oh, what you know about Cream, right? And we sat there and we like waxed poetic about a bunch of music in general, and we got along. And years would go by. He would be I like to say he's one of my first genuine friends that happen to be white. Because you know how like you grow up as a black guy and you have a white friend, or you have that gay friend or that friend, and et cetera, et cetera. They become the representation for everything of their race and their culture. I've had that before. And, and some of them are better friends now, but I used to be annoyed by it, right?
Right.
And I remember going out because I'm born and raised in New Orleans, and Chicago was my first experience outside of the state living somewhere.
Right.
And so before you know it, like I met people, but I wasn't really that close to them. And you and I gelled really well. And I like looking back on it, hindsight being 2020, you were my first genuine like friend who just happened to be white.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a little tidbit for you.
Yeah, and I really appreciated it too. And it just sort of naturally arose. We talked about music, and I was talking about Cream because I had entertain myself by playing it on piano, and I was getting really excited about that. And just to be real, I don't know that much about hip hop. I just know what I listen to, and so people sent me different songs, and so it was just funny because I don't even know. It was kind of weird. It was one of those crazy nights, and I was just talking about it to somebody else completely at the party, and then you and Rahman came over, and then I think we were all kind of a little bored at that point at the party.
Yeah, because it was just it was kind of a bland party at the time. To be fair, it was, I want to say it's like New Year's Eve parties don't really get kicked off till you're closer to midnight.
Yeah, this was early. It was like 8 p.m.
Yeah, like
something
8 p.m.
We were a little too early.
Yeah, entirely too early. But at the time, I was kind of new in the city, so it was more so like, let me check out the scene because I don't know this place. And I went in there and I was like, this is awkward. Ron and I are the only two people of color
That's true.
in here. I don't want to get killed. Like, I always think, like, when I walk into a place and there's a bunch of white people, till this day, I'm like, let me watch myself. So I secure the area, make sure I'm good.
Yeah, well, that was actually a question I was going to ask you later. But so anyway, we met that night. Let's give a little segue.
Yeah.
We met that night. We both had different jobs. I was in grad school, but we ended up collaborating on some songs that you had written.
You are on, I want to say you're on every one of my albums.
I think I might be.
Yeah, you're on every one of my albums, which is interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Except for the early demos, which you made in New Orleans.
Early demos.
All the major
that life,
albums.
Yeah, but that life I was in a rap group.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, I was in the rap group and the rap clique and everything, and then I started doing my own solo thing. Yeah.
Oh, so I'm on all the solo
you're on
albums.
every one of my solo albums.
Oh, well, I'm honored to be on there.
Thank you, man. It's an honor. It's an honor.
So, and we've done a lot of music projects, but being this the topic of my show, and I forgot to mention this. Chris also hosts 2 podcasts.
Yes, I do.
One is called Profoundly Ignorant.
Yes,
and
Chris Talks. Because I talk a lot.
So Chris Talks is more of an interview-based podcast, authentic conversations, and I would say Profoundly Ignorant is more. What do you want to call it?
I would say political geekery.
Yeah, okay, that's a good way to put it.
It's a lot of
political
politics,
geekery.
And pop culture and geekery. It's myself, my friend Sphinx and Breezy, and we all sit there together. We are talking heads about the current political climate, whatever that may be at the time, and what's going on during the week and our interests.
It's very topical. I like it. It's very entertaining. I was listening to it on an airplane about last month.
Yeah, we talked,
and I was laughing out loud.
Thank you very much.
And I had to kind of like switch podcasts because I was like it was cracking me up too much. And so it's a good one if you want to download it. Chris Talks is definitely more conversational, very awesome podcast as well, just totally different.
Thank you very much, man. It's really good.
Well, so let's dive into this. So obviously, we kind of announced our backgrounds at the beginning of the podcast, but I've always been intrigued about, being in the counseling field. We're always learning about being culturally competent, learning about intersectionality. How do you work with people of all different cultures? And that doesn't mean ethnicity. It could just mean like people that go to certain types of religious gatherings, people that live in certain regions. But it also, and I think there's a lot to be said for studying it in books, but I also find that the best way I learned was through exposure to different cultures and people that are different from me, which has always been something I've tried to expose myself to since I was younger. And my parents owning a motel, I found myself meeting people from all different ethnicities and cultural backgrounds because we lived next to a major university where a lot of people would come through. And so that was that I feel like that's one of the best ways to learn. But I really think it would be awesome for you to kind of tell us your perspective a little bit about what we can learn. This is a show for counselors, but also a show for your average listener. But how do we learn about the experience of what you have been through just in your life? Because I think there's a lot of stuff in the media and a lot of people commenting over the last couple of years, but I think that I've learned a lot more valuable things just from conversations with you than I have reading any of that. So,
well, I come from a very unique situation as far as how, like, I had a traditional inner city upbringing, like a lot of black kids, right? But New Orleans is a special flavor in the sense of, the culture is so unique. The way we do things, the way we cook, the way we believe in things. It's always been like this kind of fly way of living in a sense, and because it's filled with festivals, it's steeped in tradition, and so that's what makes it special. But obviously, when you're in it, you don't realize it until you leave. In a lot of ways, yeah. Now, I mean, we realize it now in general because I think.
But when you were young, you mean?
Yeah, when we were young,
didn't realize how special it was.
Exactly,
right.
exactly. But I come from a household where it was slightly it wasn't traditional. It was kind of broken, if you will. My mother was mostly single. She married my stepdad when I was like 5 or 6, but even that was a traumatic experience. And so I grew up in a very volatile environment, not necessarily in my house, but definitely in my neighborhood. So they were like in all the 90s, it was a high murder rate, things like that. Crime was ridiculous. Police brutality and corruption were high, and we were aware of it as children because it was one of those things that trickled down. So, the politics and the murders are fucked up with the adults, and then it blended down to the kids in the schools.
Right.
And so we would feel that, and there's that tension, that way of going about it. So you're going against the like versions of quote unquote bullies, in schools, and then you got to deal with police,
right,
and everything. So as a black child, and I'm sure most people who grew up in black households could attest to this. One of the things that we were taught when we were young is that know how to act around the police accordingly, and also you got to try twice as hard to get accepted just as much, from a regular. So I got to do better. I was always taught that the world is kind of against me and they don't want to see you rise. And as a young, optimistic kid, I thought, well, even my mom's over exaggerating. Mm-hmm. But then when you get out into the world, you're like, oh shit, this is real in a lot of ways, because you find out about institutionalized racism, the fact that the schools don't, if you live in a poor neighborhood, they'll deny you services or they won't tell you about different things. I remember in certain, and it could be blocks away from each other,
Right.
My friend's school, one of my best friends, his school was this nice school in New Orleans, and they had all these opportunity and options in the world. I would go there I went to the school across the way, about 2 miles away. And I remember them pumping limited options to me as far as what I want to do, because the counselors don't care. The counselors, I won't say they didn't care.
It didn't feel that way.
It didn't feel like they cared. That's a better way to put it.
Well, compared to your friend's school.
Exactly. And I would go to my friend's school, and actually I would study off their homework and talk to their counselors, to their guidance counselors, and would end up using them for the majority of my high school career. I like to say that really helped me shape what I wanted to do with my life.
Wow.
And yeah.
I did not even know about that story.
Yeah.
And you grew up in a notorious neighborhood, like you were talking about just in general in New Orleans, but you grew up in kind of an infamous neighborhood, didn't you?
I wouldn't say infamous. I think,
newsworthy.
Yeah, newsworthy. Yeah,
Sorry.
Definitely. Newsworthy. I grew up in a newsworthy time.
Right.
I think all of New Orleans is so mixed and blended to where it can happen at any given point in any given area. So the great Soldier Slim once said in the interview, if you were doing dirt and you came out alive in New Orleans in the 90s, you a G. You know what I'm saying? Like, which pretty much is like, and granted, I wasn't doing dirt then, but that gives you a glimpse into the violence and the drama that was going on during that time.
You were just exposed to it by living there.
Absolutely.
Right.
You're exposed to a lot by living there, man. So it was definitely a lot, but it became so normalized to us. Seeing violence and seeing the loss of life, the tragic ends, things like that became normalized. And you don't realize how traumatizing things are till you're older. But we all adapt, we all adjust. And I think that one of the misconceptions that people get about quote unquote the hood or whatnot, they especially if they grew up out of it, not inside it, is that we're human, man. Like, we have the exact same emotions. This is why we used to watch all the shows like, your Saved by the Bells, the
Right.
your 90210s, you know what I'm
Right.
saying, and even Good Times at the Jeffersons, like all these experiences, in the American culture, are essentially the same. It's just the characters are different and the slang is different.
In the situation, like the neighborhood or whatever.
Maybe the situation, but we all go through heartbreak.
Oh no, I don't mean the. I just meant like the setup.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Setup, not the emotions.
Absolutely,
Right.
yeah, exactly. We all go through the heartbreaks. We go through love. We go through pain. We go through embarrassment, things like that. And I think people forget that when they see something that's different from them.
Well, and exactly. So that actually is a very key point. And I think that's breaking it down to the most simple was that if, like, for instance, when I said infamous, it's because newsworthy. So, like, here
Absolutely.
I am, and I didn't grow up, I grew up in a weird situation. So, but the point is that I didn't grow up in the suburbs and I didn't grow up in the inner city, but I grew up in a business and I also grew up in a trailer park. So two strange places. But what I would see, and I didn't have, well, I did end up going to school in an urban area. So I ended up having a diverse ethnic friends because I went to school in downtown Lansing for some weird reason on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard was where I went to elementary school. And it was because of a lot of reasons. Then I ended up going to school in the suburbs, which was predominantly white, Caucasian, Anglo-Saxon. But my elementary school was not like that. But here I am watching television, and at that time, besides people staying at our motel, the only African-American people I saw were either on campus, and they were athletes, because I lived next to a university, or they were on the news.
Yeah.
So, and like... the show Cops, and there was actually it was weird because the way, the way the news covered these things, I think, I can't say that the news was trying to be racist, but it was sort of a labeling of that neighborhood and a labeling of the ethnicity of African American people in a way because that they would only show terrible things happening unless it was like an athlete or a famous person. It was always like, oh, something terrible happened in this part of town, and blah blah blah. And I don't know why that stuck in my head, but we were talking about it's the same. We all have the same, but it's like if I hadn't ever moved out of my town and had conversations with people that had grown up in that area, I may have had biases I would not even know about if I hadn't challenged my own, and it's not like I had stored preconceptions. I probably did, but I mean, I wasn't like very aware of what those were.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? I just knew, what I was hearing. But growing up in the elementary school was different. Going to that school, but even there, a lot of the African American friends I had like, I don't know, better opportunities or something. Like they were, you know what I'm saying? So I didn't really encounter that. What your the situation you grew up in with like the poorer school, and like you said at your school you would go to your friend's school to get help. So I feel like there's one thing to learn about it, but there's a next thing to have conversations and open up to it, because you already went to the whole moral thing. We all have the same emotions. It's just we're all growing up in a different context. And I think that's hard for people to understand if you've never visited an area or talked to somebody who's from a completely different culture than you. And so I feel like my whole thesis with that is, and I think why there's a lot of mudslinging in the media and all that is, besides to sell commercials, besides that, is because people are not actually having conversations. And people are not actually going out of their little zone of comfort. And that is lending to a lot of problems in our country right now. So anyway, that's a whole giant topic. But back to you. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's, I honestly think that conversation is something that we lack in general in our society. The opposite, for example, my daughter, she's 7 and highly emotional. Right? She and she gets pissed off for little things, and afterwards she doesn't want to talk, right? She doesn't want to talk, she just gets upset. And so one day I'm driving her to school after an upsetting morning because she's not a morning person. And one of the things that I explained to her, and I was like, hey, remember, the opposite of fear and anger is knowledge. I would like you. I was like, so you would have to tell me what's going on with you, whether it's my fault or not, so we can have an understanding, so we can move forward, and that'll solve the pain. That'll solve that, right? So I think we look at the other, and it's quick to and we're easy to villainize. Because we're sold something online, we're sold something through the media, and all these preconceived notions, right? So I know that from our end, I grew up around mostly black people,
right?
And the media or the preconceived notion, right, is American slavery. So you have white people,
right,
are the enemy. Not only that, add in that I'm in the South, I'm in the Bible Belt. So you get a lot of people who come around and they're like, you don't belong here. They justify slavery. They justify the lack of civil rights to get to degrade you and to make you less than human. So I grew up with that in mind.
Like the history of that, or actually that happening also?
The history of mine, and actually it is happening.
Well, yeah, I know that, but I mean, I wanted you to get into that.
Oh, so absolutely.
The history's there, but New Orleans and Baton Rouge are kind of like little enclaves, I suppose. And but Ramon told me he drove outside New Orleans and was feeling like...
Oh, it's definitely more rural, hick,
right.
But just a little bit more outwardly racist.
Well, he felt nervous because there was Confederate flags everywhere.
Absolutely.
Right. Just like an hour outside. Anyway, but
right outside.
So tell me more about like you felt like there you are growing up around mostly black people. Then what?
Yeah.
So like, what is this doing to your mentality?
And my only interactions with white people were when we would drive around to like different suburbs, and we would see people looking at us in fear, clutching their purses, or protesting that we shouldn't be around there. Because remember, I grew up in the era of David Duke. So David Duke was a senator in Louisiana.
He was a senator?
Yeah, he was a senator in Louisiana.
And he was also...
head of the Klan, head of the Ku Klux Klan.
Ah, yes.
Or ex-head of the Ku Klux Klan, as they say, right?
Right.
So he was a part of that white power movement. And people felt empowered and compelled to express their racism during that time. So, we have that. And then not only that, you have these situations where you are put in a situation that is outside of your comfort zone. Like take college, right? First year in college, I went to this place called Nickel State, which is in Thibodaux, Louisiana. And that is rural as fuck. And it was also the first time I would meet and go to school with white people. And granted, there were white people in New Orleans. I mean, they lived in Metairie, but there were white people in New Orleans, right? So,
I knew you.
But this was my first time really being upfront because you lived on campus, right? And it was such an eye-opening experience because on one hand, you have the super racist people who never went to school with a black person before in their lives, and they're scared out their wits,
right?
Because they're thinking you're going to do every negative thing that they've seen on TV,
or whatever their parents told them,
absolutely, or whatever their parents told them. On the other hand, you have a lot of curious kids who are like, wonder what that is like, And so it's interesting because I was one of the curious kids as well. And I remember met some guys, they were like in a dorm, the dorm next to me, right? And we were on the same, we had a lot of the same classes, right? And then one day, because I majored in psychology, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so
I forgot that.
Yeah, so I majored in psychology. So I was in there and like we actually chopped it up and we realized we had so much in common. Particularly with our families and how we relate. And so that's when we realized, well, maybe we're not so different after all, And I thought that was one of my first lessons of like, oh, white people are people too.
Right. No, but I love it's so interesting to me that you both came into college because of whatever situation you grew up in and whatever media you had heard. Mm-hmm. And not that, you were curious, right? But you also had some stored notions, and so did they. And then it took, a conversation?
Yeah, absolutely.
A meal together to find out, oh, wow, actually, we have a lot in common. We just have, some differences based on whatever.
Absolutely.
Interpretation.
And we're all going to have cultural differences.
Right, of course.
Like, even amongst black people, we have cultural differences. Because the black experience is not
it's not universal.
It's not universal. Right. We have very different black experiences. Just like white people have different white experiences. You know what I'm saying? There's all types of cultural things to consider. But I remember just having that talk and realizing talking and conversing with people is unifying. You know, I think that's an issue today where people don't talk to each other. We're so immersed in being online that we don't talk to each other. And I think people forgot how to actually be friends.
Yeah, it's getting that way. I mean, you got the social media, and then it's all about how you're using it. I mean, if you can use social media to hook up and meet up with people, you know, and also like, I guess what you're saying, like, you know, Twitter is a big one today.
Yeah,
and
Twitter is huge.
And like, I feel like there's actually like a word called Twitter fights. And it's like people aren't conversing. They're just trying to like slam each other with some type of, I don't know, I won, you're dumb, my group versus your group. It's almost becoming tribal when we could be having, I mean, some people are using the internet for very good coming together reasons or coming together purposes. But I feel we have the internet is a great tool to unify people.
Oh, absolutely.
And at the same time, it's also a tool to dig your heels in, find your comfort zone, find your tribe. You are too scared to have your own identity, so you have to have a tribal identity. So we find all sorts of, you know, different things ranging from the benign, which is, hey, I like geek culture, so I'm going to join this geek group, to underground, stormfront, hate forums to express my viewpoints, which are projected onto other people. So it's a strange thing. So versus having those conversations, but how do we have those conversations? I mean, the internet's a tool to have it, but then also you discussed in your neighborhood, it was mostly black people, and in my neighborhood, well, I wasn't really in a neighborhood, but the cities near me, not the one I went to elementary school, but the cities near where my parents had the motel were I was between a very white area and between a mixed ethnicity area because of the university. So it also depends on where are we living and how are we interacting in the community.
Exactly. I was actually going to mention that.
Oh, okay.
As far as like living ways. In New Orleans, it was a little bit. New Orleans is a big gumbo pot, depending on where you're at.
Yeah.
So it was majority black inside the city. And there are a couple of specks of white, of course, uptown and your Gentilly areas, but for the most part, New Orleans it was a really big black environment. And then of course outskirts. What I found the most interesting as far as race relations is when I moved to Chicago. Chicago is one of the most diverse cities I've ever been.
Oh yeah,
in general. But however, it's the most segregated city.
Totally by neighborhood.
I didn't know. I was joking with a friend of mine. I was like, I didn't know there were this many different types of white people. This shit's crazy. You got Greek. You got a Polish neighborhood. There's Polish people like for a whole neighborhood.
There's more Polish people in the west side of Chicago than anywhere in the world except the capital of Poland, which is escaping me right now. Warsaw.
Which is so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you had all these different cultures.
You forgot Swedish.
Yeah, Swedish.
My grandma's from Chicago. She's Swedish.
Yep.
Norwegian neighborhood, Norwegian hospital up there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What else? You got Little Italy.
Yeah.
Oh wait, you already said that?
No. We have all types. You know what I'm saying? So and then you literally, if there was a demographic, there was a neighborhood for it.
Southside Irish.
Yep. Yeah. So,
and then of course Logan Square, which was partly German.
Yep. Yeah, partly German. Then you had right around the Latin area as well.
Right. Yeah. We were right near Little Puerto Rico, Humboldt Park.
Absolutely. Yeah. Humboldt Park, Little Puerto Rico. So and it was interesting. I'll never forget. And I at first I thought initially I was like, this is awesome. This is really cool that I can get to these places. And then I realized people don't leave their neighborhoods. So it's built to keep people segregated.
It's crazy.
And it's crazy because you can leave. You can leave, but it creates this fear of the other. And I think that's what hurts us as human beings. I remember listening to Chance the Rapper. He has this song on acid rap called Pusher Man, right? And one of the lyrics that stuck out to me, he was because he was talking about the murder rate in Chicago. Because everybody talks about Chicago's murder rate. Everybody talks about it. But they don't realize it's just in the black neighborhoods.
It is. It's just on the southwest side.
Yeah. And what people don't know, you know this from living there, if it doesn't happen in the neighborhood, nobody gives a shit. You know what I'm saying?
And not only that, real quick comment in Chicago, we have aldermen. So every neighborhood has like basically a mini mayor. Another reason not to leave the neighborhood. Every neighborhood's got a bar.
Yeah.
So anyway,
pretty much, I feel like that's all like a way to keep people in.
Right.
It's like, hey, why you got to leave? You know what I'm saying? We gave you everything. You just got to go downtown to go to work, and that's it.
Well, that's the other thing. We only interact on the train.
Yep, only interact on the train, and out of fear. They don't really interact.
Well, no, people are kind of stoic on the train.
Absolutely. So you're not expected to.
So
talk.
Chicago, you could interact, but you had to leave your comfort zone. So you where we met, with one of the first places you lived, we actually lived. We didn't know it at the time,
but we live like right around the corner from each other.
Finally, when I was coming to record music, you're like, I live here. I'm like, what? That's 2 blocks from my house, or from my apartment.
That was crazy.
And I was like, oh, I guess I'll just walk over then. I thought I was gonna have to take the train like all over. I didn't know where you lived. So in the first neighborhood, but actually it was. I feel like I'm trying to figure out where we're going with this, but I feel like so far, just to summarize, conversations.
Yeah.
And also understanding that you were raised with a cultural viewpoint.
I want to go on and say lack of empathy, because that's where I was headed towards with the Chance thing.
Oh, okay.
Chance the rapper, like he had did this song and it was about the murder rates, and like, remember how the murder rates used to skyrocket in the spring because all the leftover beefs in the winter, you know, and like there all this talk about murder. And Chicago's murder rate, but like North Shore doesn't care, Gold Coast doesn't care, you know. And I remember him saying, like, I know you're scared. You can ask us if we're scared too. If you were there, then maybe you would care too. And I was like, oh my God, that's so real, because these people are scared of that criminal element and don't realize we are too. No one wants to get shot. No one's comfortable with violence.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, in the human condition, we're not comfortable with that. But we're in a situation where, due to poverty, due to lack of resources, lack of people don't respect Black mental illness.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So we have all that, and we're just living in this area where we're forced to deal with it.
Food deserts.
And we are left to be, we are paranoid. I told you, I remember, I think our whole race has PTSD.
I remember that.
And this is before Trayvon.
Right. This is before, you told me this before any of the Black Lives Matter stuff happened. Before any, I mean, not that this stuff wasn't happening, but I think what happened with the Trayvon and...
it became popping to kill Black people.
Well, it also became televised.
Absolutely.
And it was finally Eric Gardner. And but we were talking about this... I don't know how many years before that. You said that to me
way before that, yeah.
7 or 8 years before this whole thing came up.
Absolutely.
And so that was kind of opening my eyes, because I had not experienced, what you had experienced and what you had grown up with. And like why you when you said I'm paranoid, tell me more about that, because that's actually true. I mean, not in a bad way, but like
No, actually in a bad way.
Well, I mean, in a bad way too.
I would say that.
Right, okay.
Like, it's one of those things. I remember when almost every... I can't speak for everybody. I know that a lot of Black males have an experience, a negative experience with the police. And I remember when I was young, I was about 23 years old. I was walking down the street, and the police stopped me, and he was like, "Hey, what are you doing outside?" And me, being a young asshole, was like, "Hey, I'm being 23," and kept walking. And he was like, "Yo, stop." And of course I stopped, right? And he was like, "There was a murder down the street." And I went, "I'm sorry to hear about that. That sounds terrible. As you can see, I'm just going to the store, man. I'm not trying to that's when I get humble. I'm like, yo, man, I ain't got no issue, because I see the look on his face, right? And so then, I had a knife in my back pocket. Not like a pocket knife per se, but more so like a knife, because I was cooking beforehand and just threw it in my pocket, because I was just going to the store to get some seasoning real quick, right? And I was like, yo, just to let you know, I have a knife in my pocket. I had both my hands up, Just to let you know, I have a knife in my pocket. And he was like, he's got a knife. And then he just hit me. And like, he hit me on the head. And I fell. And I didn't get scared because first of all, I didn't know what was going on. I was like, this is crazy. And the only thing that kind of that caused me to panic a little bit was my friend who I was walking with. He and thank goodness to this day he walked with me, because like he had this look of panic and fear in his face. It's like tears started welling up in his eyes, and you know, dudes don't cry that much. You know what I'm saying?
We're told not to cry.
Yeah,
right?
when we see like a black dude kind of like tearing up, I was like, oh shit, this is bad. You know,
right.
and like next thing you know, 2 more police cars came through, and like he hit me again. I didn't say anything. Like, this is me complying.
This is the training like you had been taught. Don't
do anything. This is me complying.
Right.
And I was like, but I also asked him, why are you hitting me? I'm not doing anything. And like, he was just angry. And then he just hit, and like right before he hit me with the door of the car. Because he was like, as he threw me in the car, he hit me with the door of the car first. And then like I ended up spending the night in jail. And my friends bailed me out. But that was an I am me, in other words, which means I am a black geek. I'm a guy who doesn't do shit. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So like I was literally walking to the store, and that corner store run turned into an overnight jail stay. You know what I'm saying? So like, and then you fast forward years later, you have you have a Trayvon, you have a Michael Brown, you have a Philando Castile, and everything. And I guarantee you they would have tried to villainize me just like they villainized them. Mm-hmm. You know? Mm-hmm. And it's that type of PTSD, right? Because and the thing is, what we're told is that police do that shit and nothing happens. Like,
no consequences.
Like,
well, we can look at the articles. I mean,
absolutely.
all the findings.
Look at the data,
usually
man. It's encouraged.
Right.
It's encouraged. So when you have situations like that, and then you fast forward to the years of the days of the online videos, right? Mm-hmm. I tried to explain this to white people out here, because at first they didn't get it.
Out in Seattle here.
Yeah, out in Seattle here. And I was like, and I had to explain to a lady, and this is a terrible way, but I had to let her know. I was like, hey, imagine if there's a rapist, and you see this rapist, and like he rapes people with blonde hair, like you have blonde hair, right? And I was like, so you literally see this rapist rape somebody with blonde hair, and the police catch him, but then they release him and give him 2 weeks vacation. You know what I'm saying?
Oh my God.
You would feel a little hesitant to walk outside that next day, because you have to watch the rape online. Then you have to know that rapist got away and inspired other rapists to rape people, because hey, it's a free for all. You're not going to get in trouble.
So the metaphor being that the police were
replace rape with murder,
right?
You know what I'm saying?
Right. The police were not being held accountable for murdering or misarresting or beating people that were innocent.
Exactly. And by the rulings, it sets an example. It sets a precedent that this thing could be done and you could be fine. That's why you started seeing more publicized murders, because they were getting away with it. Who gonna check them?
And so, because of the era of the cell phone camera and the videos, this is why this all came. This has been happening for way longer.
Years, man. Years.
So it's like, I can't remember. Yeah, I mean, we talked about that a long time ago. So actually, I feel like, and so, oh yeah, Rodney King. I mean, that's going way back, 92. But also, just curious, the next day when you got out of jail, what did they charge you with?
Possession of an illegal weapon.
Really? Mm-hmm. A kitchen knife.
Yeah.
So what did you... I'm just sort of curious about the end of the story. Like, what did you do? Like, did you have to go to court? Or like...
I went to court, and they realized it was bogus, and
they
just threw it out.
So, okay. Yeah, so, I mean, that is just like, usually outside the realm of my experience. And I guess I didn't realize, I learned about, like, Anglo-Saxons being the predominant culture and all that later on when I was in graduate school, like as a concept. Because I used to joke to people all the time when I was in college, because I kind of look like a chameleon. I don't know if you knew that, but like I have a reputation for being a chameleon. Like I can look differently and I can blend into situations very easily. Yeah. And I've always been that way. But also part of it's being an Anglo-Saxon and being kind of, you know, very mixed. I have very mixed European heritage, but like I used to joke in college. Like I used to be like it was a joke to be like, oh, I walked into that party, nobody said anything. They just thought I fit in. And I walked into this part, and I remember joking that I walked into like some golf event or something, and like nobody questioned me. It was me and my friend. We walked in and we just like had some drinks and left, and like no one questioned us, and we were not a member of the golf club, and we weren't supposed to be there.
Being white is awesome.
I didn't realize that was what it was.
Yeah.
But because I was in, you know, college and I didn't realize that was what was happening. So because I would just kind of be like, oh yeah, I'm a chameleon. That's why that happened.
Yeah.
Like I got lucky or whatever.
It's a very wasp move.
Right. Right. So then later on, learning that it was versus, and then I remember talking to you. I was like, well, if you had walked into that golf club, I think that you might have been questioned.
Oh, I don't doubt that at all, sir. I think I would be arrested.
Right.
So that's most likely what that would be. With that, like I said, it creates a level of paranoia.
That's where I was going. Because I was saying it was healthy paranoia because the fact that you have to protect yourself. But then I'm thinking, well, actually, that's not healthy. You shouldn't have to protect yourself because this is the whole point, which is that it's only healthy because you're adapting to a sick system.
Exactly. Have you ever lived in fear? Have you ever lived in fear?
Very briefly.
Yeah, that is literally every day for a lot of black people.
Well, and you used to make the joke when I would visit. You'd be like, Paul's driving.
Oh, yeah. Paul, you're driving.
Because
absolutely.
A car full of...
You're driving this weekend, by the way.
Right. Right, because if they spot me in the driver's seat, they're less likely to pull us over.
Absolutely.
And I thought you were... I knew you were serious at that point, but like years ago, I thought it was a joke.
Yeah.
And they were like, no, we all want you to drive.
We all want you to drive.
And I was like, okay.
Way less threatening.
Right.
Way less threatening situation.
And that does bring me to a thing about the police. I wanted to say the Dallas police in 2009, and I need to look up these stats, but I'll put this article in the show notes to remind me. Oh, right. 147 excessive force complaints.
The year I moved there.
Oh, really?
It's funny.
I looked up this study recently, and they had, I don't remember, a lot of arrests, okay? 2000, they had a lot of complaints, and the Dallas police chief, who I believe is African American, put in place a basically an education seminar for all the police that had to go through it. And this is what the seminar was. It was basically Psych 101. And what it was these are regular people. They have emotions. They have feelings. And so when you're going to confront somebody, use the following tactics, which are listening to them, acknowledging their feelings, talking about choices and consequences, asking them questions, listening.
That's what you should have fucking told them in the first place.
Well, right. But this is the training the police went through.
That's the shit that pissed me off, though. Like, why does something have to happen for you to express empathy?
Well, exactly. And how long does it take? And why are we not looking at this?
Exactly.
So then in 2012, 3 years later, excessive force complaints were down to about 46. I look up the numbers later, but that's down a third.
Yeah.
And the arrests were down 1,000 arrests. So if you think about human nature, if somebody's innocent and you're yelling at them like they're guilty in an authoritarian way, people tend to get emotional.
People get emotional and defensive.
Right. And you, luckily, in that moment, just like collapsed and didn't do anything.
Well, because I was hurt.
Well, you were hurt, but also, like, what if you had fought? Like, you could be dead.
Yeah, I could definitely be dead.
What I'm saying,
we are taught from an early age, don't fight with the police.
Right. So in the Dallas police example, they had this amazing change among the police force with using basic psychology and empathy. Now, if somebody had a gun out, they didn't change their tactic. But if somebody's just upset, they had way less arrests, way less excessive force complaints in 3 years after putting together that. And it's literally was probably a weekend training. That's it.
I don't know. I think that Dallas still has a long way to go.
Oh, I'm okay. Time out. Is that fix everything? No. What I'm saying is that some police officers listened to that, took it to heart, and tried to do differently. The fact is why isn't this in the police academy? Why isn't this?
Oh, this should definitely be in the police
Why
academy.
isn't this in the attic? Why are we having these issues? But I'm just goes to show that like a slight bit, like you said, a slight bit of knowledge changed it for some people.
Yeah, it helps out.
It's not fixing the whole problem. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I think it can. I think.
Well,
we need to have more. I agree with the logic and the belief that police should police their own community. So if you have a policeman, you should police your own community. It creates a level of familiarity,
like having relationships.
Mm-hmm. Not only that, yeah. Absolutely. It's great to have policemen who are from the area that they are policing.
That would make sense because they would understand the culture of that neighborhood.
They would understand the culture of the neighborhood. That's what you have a lot of times. You have a lot of times where people police an area where they don't understand the culture. They don't understand the people, so they look at them as the other. And when you look at somebody as the other, you lose empathy. You know,
right?
One of the things
you look at it's a label. You're looking at people with putting a label on them, and maybe preconceived notions.
Because you know what I stopped doing over the years?
What?
I stopped searching for empathy in my oppressors. I stopped saying, hey, maybe they wouldn't be racist if they understood my story. They don't give a fuck about my story. All they see is a black skin. All they see is the other. You know, so I'm not here for the empathy. I won't assume that they have empathy for me. I won't assume that because racist people are just racist people. And they do want you to die. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not like sitting here begging for them to have a heart. This ain't a Christmas special. So
right. Well, you have to protect yourself.
Absolutely.
So it's a real threat. But when you're younger, you think, oh, maybe just if they hear my story or that, and then through your experiences, because that's only one of many that you've talked about.
That's sad though, because we grew up with this sense of there's this innocence and this sense of empathy, where we have to try to see the good in people. Mm-hmm. And somebody had said something a while ago. It was online. And it was poignant, and it was a little raw, but I agreed. He said, I have no interest in loving my enemy. And I was like, yeah, I get it. When you look at what racism has done, what slavery has done, what institutionalized racism has done, what the prison industrial complex has done, they have told us time and time again that they do not love us. They do not care whether or not we are building blocks for America. So I don't want to hear anybody's like, well, why don't you trust white people? You know? Because history. Present. Fuck. You know?
Right.
So it's one of those things where I just have to it's a balance, man. Obviously not everybody hashtag not all white men, but
right.
Hashtag
that's not what you never said.
Everybody,
that.
Yeah.
You were just saying that you had to learn to protect yourself.
Absolutely.
And you had to learn to have a layer of mistrust before you trust.
We just and people, black people are just like everybody else, man. Like Latins, like Native Americans, like Asian, they just want to prosper. They just want to support their family and prosper.
Right. And so that and I won't get and the whole racism thing. There's a whole lot to be said for that. And basically, there's a line in an old song called "You've Got to Be Carefully Taught to Hate." You heard that? You heard that song?
No, sir. No.
So it's basically saying that when kids are kids and they run around together, they don't see they might notice differences, but they don't have preconceived notions.
Absolutely.
And so it's an old song, and it's actually, I'm trying to remember what it's from. It's called "You've Got to Be Carefully Taught," and it's from a musical, which is you've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed into your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught to be afraid of people whose eyes are oddly made and whose people whose skin is a different shade. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught before it's too late, before you're 6 or 7 or 8, to hate all the people your relatives hate. You've got to be carefully taught. And there's more. And it's basically talking. It's an anti-racism song, but it's basically bringing it out. It's from South Pacific. It's a play from like the 50s.
Oh, that's
so
nice.
It's showing about how people grow up in this environment and then they just look for confirmatory bias, which is in psychology, which I think confirmatory bias is like shows like Cops, who exploit people that get arrested. And actually, This American Life just did a special on Cops about how corrupt it is as a produced show, and how they coerce people into signing waivers.
Racist.
Well, and they coerce people into signing waivers to be on television. So, and half the time they don't show what happens later. But a lot of the times, those are misarrests that are thrown out.
Yeah.
So there's another thing that this brings up in, because you said my whole race has PTSD, which is, this is, have you ever heard of transgenerational trauma?
Absolutely.
Is a trauma that's transferred from the first generation of trauma survivors to the second and further generations of offspring of the survivors via complex post-traumatic stress disorder mechanisms.
Totally believe
And
that.
they first kind of observed this, and clinicians observed this in the 60s, when a large number of children of the Holocaust survivors were seeking treatment in Canada, in clinics in Canada. And the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors were overrepresented by 300% among the referrals to psychiatry clinics in comparison with the representation of the general population. So again, here, symptoms of transgenerational trauma in recent years have been identified among Black Americans in relation to the effects of slavery and racial discrimination. This passing of trauma can be rooted from the family unit itself or found in society via current discrimination and oppression. The traumatic event does not need to be individually experienced by all members of the family. The lasting effects can still remain and impact descendants from external factors. For example, Black children's internalization of others' reactions to their skin color manifests as a form of lasting trauma originally experienced by their ancestors. This reaction to Black skin stems from similar attitudes that led to the traumatizing conditions and enslavement of slaves. Black children and youth are more susceptible to racial trauma because they have not yet acquired the knowledge to have the full understanding of racism and its effects, because they're kids.
Yeah.
However, these traumatizing behaviors experienced at a young age are a reflection of a child's parenting. A white child may learn racist behaviors from their environment, but on the same token, a Black child can learn to assert their Blackness and how to respond to racist remarks and actions from their parents. It just depends on who your parents are. Traces of trauma have an impact on Black and other minority children's success in educational contexts, etc. There's whole articles on this. There's whole books on this.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that?
I truly believe that. I think that pain transfers.
Yeah.
Pain travels. The pain that you inflict on others. Remember, these were people who were traumatized. They were brutally beaten, tortured. They were separated from family. These are people who went through some of the worst long-lasting torture of any human being in the history of the world. And we're not talking like years and years ago.
This was not too long ago.
No, this is not too long ago. My mother is in her mid-60s, and she integrated her high school. You know what I'm saying? So, like,
wow.
When you think about that, that is not long ago.
So, just for people who don't know, what does that mean? She integrated her high school.
She was one of the first Black people in our high school
to integrate into a mixed ethnicity community.
Absolutely, it was the first time Black and white people were together in one high school in that city.
Your mother,
my mother.
Wow,
that is not a long time ago.
It is not a long time ago. So
I know she looks young because she's Black, but it's not a long time ago.
So I think there's an attitude of cynicism in our culture right now, and especially, unfortunately, among certain segments of the Anglo-Saxon community.
Yes.
Unfortunately, also especially in places of power and media status. And so I think as an Anglo-Saxon descendant, it is a duty to confront that in our communities when we see that among people saying stereotypical derogatory things about a group of people. It's ridiculous.
I think it's more important that white people speak on racist issues.
Absolutely.
Just like I think that it's very important for straight people to speak on LGBTQIA issues. I remember a friend of mine out here was like, hey, we're going to the Black Lives Matter event. Do you want to go? And I was like, I already know I matter. You need to go because they need to see that you think I matter. You know,
that's a very good point.
Yeah.
So, like lifting each other up and getting involved, and it is so important because it matters for all of our rights.
Absolutely.
And I mean, there's a lot of work to be done. And as we said, there's a lot of work to be done here. And I think what we're talking about is having conversations.
Absolutely.
Is having those conversations, not just through the internet and through media and music, like personal conversations. And that takes everybody getting out of their comfort zone. So I remember, actually, just to bring it full circle, when I first met you in Chicago, you invited me to a Super Bowl party with the Saints.
Yes.
And Earl was NFC
Holy
Championship
shit.
or AFC
Yeah,
Championship.
no, it was an NFC Championship.
NFC Championship.
Saints game, yes.
And I got there, and I walked in, and I'd recorded music at your house before.
Yeah.
But I did discover I was the only person who would be considered white at the entire party, and there were 35 plus people there.
Absolutely.
And that was actually an experience for me because besides visiting a few other like big cities that I'd lived or been to and gone to different places, I had never actually been, like I'd been to Harlem and I'd been to Detroit, downtown Detroit, and I'd been to different parts of New York, and I'd been out of the country and like been in places where I was the only like English speaking person, but I'd never been to, but that's all like tourism. I'd never been to a party where everyone was expecting me and excited that I was there, and except that I was the only white person, and everyone was talking about the Saints, who I knew about them, but like I grew up with the Lions, who always lose, and it was like sad for me. But half my family's from my family's half from Chicago, so it was like the Bears. Everybody kind of likes the Bears, but they always lose too.
Yeah.
And then I was there, and I remember just for like I don't know, like just like a minute or two, I was like, this is weird. Like I was like, this is weird. Like I don't understand the Saints phenomenon, and I also am the only white person here, and that made me feel strange. So I was like thinking for a second, how the hell does Chris feel when he shows up to work or just gets on the L train and he's the only black person in the car? That's like normal for you.
Yeah, and that's weird. It's
Right.
just as weird.
Except that you like have probably adapted at
Absolutely.
first, well, after you moved out of New Orleans. But you know what I mean? But for me, it was interesting, and I think that's an experience that can help change people when they get out of their comfort zone. And it doesn't take much work. All it took for us was a conversation at a party.
Absolutely.
And having commonality over basically music was the whole point. And then
language.
we started the universal language. Thank you. I love that quote.
Yep.
And then we started making some music together, and we made music with your friends, and you made music with my friends.
Yep.
And we're still making music, and we're going to actually have a Chris Talks episode where we talk a lot more about personal stuff coming up. So we're going to put the link to that.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to know more. But just for fun, we did actually form a super group, which we had an interesting name for.
Yes, actually, yes, it's the Gentlemen of Leisure. We're the Gentlemen of Leisure Collective.
And I remember when you named it, it was a joke because all of us worked all the time. And we had to bust our ass because nobody in the group got handed a silver spoon. We're all from either really poor or lower middle class families.
That is correct.
And so we thought it was funny because we never had any leisure time except when we were like maybe little kids.
And the part that I did tell Paul was that Gentlemen of Leisure is also a euphemism for pimps.
I did find that out later. And, and so that was interesting to tell my mom and dad about that. No,
that's awesome. That is awesome.
Yeah, so that album is out, the first album we recorded.
Yeah.
And now you can find it on, where can you find it? SoundCloud?
SoundCloud,
Spotify.
Yes, sir.
It's called The Great and Powerful.
Great and Powerful.
And it's actually got a ton of different musicians on it that are all friends of ours. And it was a lot of fun. We've been working on that. And Chris and I are both working on music projects and podcasts, which you can see and if you want to look us up. But basically, I appreciate this conversation. And I mean, let's just put it this way. I mean, this is just like, what is this? Just a small step to discuss this. And the more discussions we have, I don't know, the more awareness we create, the more knowledge you're better at summarizing things.
Oh yeah, I think that in general, the more conversations, knowledge is the cure. You know what I'm saying? By learning about different experiences, we find the common ground, I think. So that's what's going to help society in the future. Talk to people. Get out your comfort zone. Talk to people. Erase the fear. Replace that fear with faith in yourself. A lot of times you put out the same energy that you get. You know, so remember to approach things from a positive aspect, and you'll get some positive vibes. Yeah, that's how I look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Chris, for letting me use your studio and interview you.
Oh, no problem, man. Thank you for doing this, man. This has been great. I'm happy to be a part of your show. Like I said, we've always had plenty of conversations like this, and it's just good to have this right now in front of the world, sober. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, this is a conversation that's not on the phone.
Yeah,
totally sober.
Totally sober. It's not over drinks and be like, you know what I fucking hate? Racist.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. Me too.
Yeah. But we've had. I mean, this is a very mild version, but I'm glad we got to put this out here.
Me too, man.
And all right, I guess we're gonna go play some music now.
All right. Thank you very much. Absolutely, man. Let's get to it.
All right.
Peace.
This has been another episode of the Intentional Clinician podcast. I really enjoyed my conversation with Chris. I find him to be one of the most honest people I've ever met. And not only is he honest, but he will tell you pretty much anything he thinks about anything, whether it's going on right now or it's something that he's read about or heard about. And I think that's really refreshing because we became friends over conversations. And we came from quite different cultural and environmental areas. So if we can become friends, and real friends, genuine friends, where you share your inner feelings and highs and lows and, you know, even get in arguments and all things like that, I think that most people could, but there's a lot of inner work to do sometimes that keeps us from having certain friends or getting in certain situations, and especially breaking out of our comfort zone. I know that it was challenging for me at first to break out of my comfort zone in my life, but when I did, there's so many rewards that have come from it, and it's not a one-time thing. I think you have to continually break out of your comfort zone. So I just wanted to thank Chris for his fantastic commentary, his honest answers to my questions, and his challenging of me over the years, not only as a friend, but just as somebody who's really conscious about what's happening in the world and wants to help others. Also, Chris makes some pretty good music, so you can check out some of the links in the show notes to Chris Blount and Gentleman of Leisure. He's very talented and quite a wordsmith. I also love listening to his podcast. Now, Profoundly Ignorant is really funny, and he kind of plays a character in that, so you'll see. And he is himself, but it's definitely interesting. And Chris Talks is also personally my favorite of his podcast because it's just his raw personality, interviewing people and having awkward conversations because he's so honest, and I love it. So, yeah, for more on Chris, you can check out the show notes. And now for the disclaimer. The recording you just listened to consists of the personal opinions of Paul Krauss and his guest, and while these may be based on their experiences and things that they have read in the literature, they should not be viewed as the definitive opinion on any subject. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for treatment. If you are in a crisis, please dial 911 right now or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline 1-800-273-8255. If you are in need of counseling or another professional, please don't hesitate to make an appointment with a local counselor in your area. If you are looking for counseling in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area, you can find out more information about Paul's practice at healthforlifegr.com and the new Trauma Informed Counseling Center of Grand Rapids, which is in Health for Life's office. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. If you like this podcast, please share it with friends. And if you have social media, you can share it there as well. Also, Just a last note for clinicians. If you are looking for electronic medical records for your practice, I recommend trying out Simple Practice. If you're interested in trying out Simple Practice, check out the link in the notes of this episode for a 30-day free trial. If you utilize the link I provided and decide to subscribe, this podcast will get a small referral fee. I thank you in advance. All right, everybody. It's been real. I hope you liked this episode. There are a lot of cool links to music, to podcasts, to different things we referenced in the show notes, and you can check those out. Feel free to send me some feedback. Feel free to rate this podcast on the podcast app or wherever you rate them and whatever. And I'm going to leave you with some music. So thanks so much for tuning in.
Behold your applause, the humanistic flaws, that vanity in us all. The hero and the villain, we validated it all. But what good's a great man with every obstacle solved? Yes, promise provides precedence. Search for perfection in hopes to catch excellence. Make reality of what they said was never meant. Risk a little hell for what we feel is heaven sent. And so we clock in, deal with the worst of. Knowing wisdom's not the lesson but the search of. We overworked over it all and underpaid. But we know through the struggle is how the heart is made. That's why I stay chill like the Eskimos say. Cause you gotta be prepared for when the ice breaks. And we won't erase, cause we don't concede. Cause we deserve it all, so raise your glasses please.
Cheers, my friends, I'm speaking to you. Keep on fighting for what is true. With our minds made up, we can lose. Cheers, my friends, this one's for you.
We sung the song of sorrow and hum the hymn of pain. We focus on the more, cause we got more to gain. And if you go through hurdles, well here we go again. Just maneuver through it all and let success reign. Insane and out of space, so many out of bounds. Which means they out of touch, they high up in the clouds. But I'm still down to earth, which means I'm on the ground. Which means I'm close to you, so I'm into it now. So say hooray for the providers who persevere through the most severe, cause they survivors. The ones who live to pull an extra shift and never tire. Who do it for their family cause they the main suppliers. You deserve a trophy and accolades as well. The faker never fail and let the real prevail. And when the weak bails, all that remains is us. And with that said, I say salute, bottoms up.
Cheers, my friends, I'm speaking to you. Keep on fighting for what is true. With our minds made up, we can lose. Cheers, my friends, this one's for you.
That's probably Jared's fault.
The microphone kind of smells like barbecue.
There's nobody left for miles, and the streets are running bloody red. But all that remains were the halls, because everybody else is dead. Something went wrong, because the dead won't stay that way. They run and they bite, and if they catch you, you ain't getting away. No, no, no. And if you don't wanna go, then there's only one thing you need to know. You better run, or your eyes are just dead as grass. You better run,
Holy George Romero and Robert Kirkman. Apocalypse emerging, these bodies through crypts and hearses. It's scientific burdens and monsters that come to surface. If you ain't got a weapon on your person, you better run. A state of panic, panoramic, sees the damage due to lack of understanding. Make it difficult to manage. Disgusted because the streets are flooded. There's blood on the canvas. You a victim if they ever catch you stranded. Trust me, you better run. Now are you in or are you praying? I ask the motto. Teaming up with your rivals, all for the sake of survival. It's a fight to the death, and the death to fight for the title of the last to walk the earth. And all that I know is that you better run. The stricken numbers with terrifying abundance make you wonder if your will to live is deeper than a hunger. We'll rip through your flesh and brain before you ever take us under. You don't want it. If you see us, then we coming, and you better run.
And if you don't wanna be their food, get yourself together, cause there's only one thing you can do. You better run, and your ass is just as dead as grass. You better run, or there's no way that you're gonna last. You know what you do and take a shot at the head. And if your ass is too slow, you'll be worse off than dead. So run.
This is serious, it's not a game, get the fuck out of here!
Only you ride it briskly too. You walk yourself into the empty. Only you ride it briskly too. You walk yourself into the empty room.
My name is Chris Blount, and God love me, so y'all can't tell me shit. And I was told to bless the track with my benevolence. The gentleman, the leisure, do it for the hell of it. We keep it real when everybody else embellishing. Paul and I was politicking, I was telling them how since we did that last joint that they've been on us ever since. He said, cool, holla at me when you get in town. So now I'm in the spot, you know it's going down. See, we collaborate to make the magnificent. People hate us cause they recognize the difference. Plus I got the homie keynote on the instruments. We tryna body everything, now we killing it. Funny how they wasn't listening like talking about it. Now every time we write a song they wanna talk about it. I keep it moving cause I'm kinda used to getting doubted. So I'm like fuck them if they feel some type of way about it. It's like the hippies then combined with the gritty and design something witty to provide for your city. And it's so superb how he's brilliant with the words. He exemplifies the curve while he do it for the verbs. If you ain't heard, it's the champagne sipper cool. Ninjas hate seeing us win and commit super cool. Sometimes you gotta face the mirror just to get the truth and confront the one that holds you down. Only